Good afternoon. My name is Kris Ullman, and I'm the president of Eagle Forum, and I was blessed and honored for many years to work directly under our founder, Phyllis Schlafly. And in 1972, in February actually, Phyllis said, "Of all the classes of people who ever lived, the American woman is the most privileged. The claim that American women are downtrodden and unfairly treated is the fraud of the century." And I have to say, it's not just the fraud of that century, but the fraud of this century as well. As most of you know, Congress sent the ERA to the states on March 22nd, 1972, with a 7-year ratification deadline. Within 12 months, 30 states had ratified. But a small group of women under the name Stop ERA and led by Phyllis Schlafly took what seemed at that time the impossible task to inform the American people and rally American women to stand up for their rights as women. Over the next 6 years, only 5 states ratified ERA, but 5 of the original 30 rescinded their previous ratifications, leaving a net 0 for 6 years of lobbying. The Equal Rights Amendment was presented to the American public as something that would benefit women and, quote, put women in the U.S. Constitution, even though the word women isn't even in the ERA. It was supposed to lift women out of their so-called second-class citizenship. However, in thousands of debates, the ERA advocates were then, and are still today, we just saw it at the hearing, unable to show in any way how the ERA was going to benefit women or end discrimination against them. Most women knew then and know now that we benefit from every constitutional right that men do. Our Constitution already is sex neutral. So the last state to ratify before the deadline expired was Indiana in 1977. That was 40 years ago. No, it was 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Despite the, quote, unconstitutional exercise of congressional authority, which was the words of U.S. District Judge Marion Callister invalidating the extension, Congress pushed that extension back by 3 years and 8 days. So it died a second death in 1982. But for the next 40 years, dozens of hearings, votes in legislatures, committees, referendums, even the U.S. Congress attempted to start from scratch in 1983, but it went nowhere, and they were totally unsuccessful until the left came up with what they called their 3-state strategy. In 2017, Nevada, and in 2018, Illinois, and 2020, Virginia were the last 3 states to ratify. This was 40 years after the ERA was dead and buried. Talk about changing the rules of the game. Not midway, but 40 seasons later, they were trying to change it. In 2021, a U.S. district judge dismissed the lawsuit by Nevada and Illinois, and at that time Virginia, but Virginia was wise enough to get off that lawsuit. But in 2021, a judge said that not only did those states lack standing to sue and to force the archivist to implement the ERA, but even if the plaintiffs had standing, Congress set deadlines for ratifying the ERA that expired long ago. And very interestingly, this morning at 11 a.m., that case was appealed to the appeals court, and the appeals court upheld the lower court's ruling, admitting that the ERA is dead. It's dead, dead, dead. It's dead, and rightly so. It's bad for women. As everyone has said here, it could put abortion in the Constitution. It would allow men who identify as women to usurp women's rights, and even men who don't identify as women to usurp women's rights, gaining access to sports teams and jails and private places. Our young women might lose the ability to go to single-sex schools. Insurance companies that now are allowed to charge differently based on the sex of the person they're covering might not be able to do that anymore. Phyllis Schlafly and the women of the 20th century stood up for their rights as women, and they rejected ERA. They did not back down to the feminists, the media, Hollywood, 3 presidents, 3 first ladies, almost every federal elected politician in the 1970s and 80s. But yet in today's climate, these liberal elites cannot even tell us what a woman is. American women are ready to fight this battle again. We are not and have never been victims, and the liberal feminists do not speak for all women. We at Eagle Forum know that the claim that American women are downtrodden and unfairly treated is the fraud of this century as well. Thank you.